One dance and I'm yours, Ricardo Beneventi laughed, the sound as cold as the ice in his whiskey. The words hung in the air of the Obsidian Club like a death sentence wrapped in silk. But if I feel nothing but the floor beneath my feet, you'll spend the rest of your life wishing I'd just shot you in that office. Vicious laughter rippled through the crowd of 200 criminals and power brokers. But when Cindy Pearson lifted her chin and took her first defiant step onto that blood-stained dance floor, the silence that followed was the kind that makes predators remember they too can be prey. Don't watch alone. Join our storytelling family if you haven't subscribed yet. We're on a beautiful journey of magical tales and we'd love to have you with us. Turn on notifications, you won't want to miss tomorrow's story. Maybe our best yet. Now back to the story. The Obsidian Club in Lower Manhattan pulsed with the kind of darkness that money could never quite polish into respectability. Crimson velvet booths lined walls where secrets were traded like currency, and the bass of the music was loud enough to swallow screams. 200 guests draped in designer suits and diamond-studded watches raised glasses of whiskey that cost more than most people's monthly rent, their voices a symphony of corruption echoing against the exposed brick and steel. This was the kingdom of Ricardo Beneventi, the man they called the architect of agony, the puppet master of an empire built on blood and broken promises that stretched from Wall Street to the waterfront. His face bore the kind of beauty that made people forget he was dangerous until it was too late, sharp cheekbones and darker eyes that had watched empires crumble at his command. Those eyes, black as a moonless night, had witnessed more betrayals than most people read about in novels, and tonight they were fixed on her with the intensity of a hunter who'd just found unexpected sport. But amidst all that beautiful darkness, there was someone who did not belong to this world of silk and savagery. Cindy Pearson moved between the tables with a silver tray, serving overpriced cocktails with movements that were precise, mechanical, invisible. She had learned long ago that the best way to survive in this club was to become a ghost, never meet anyone's eyes, never speak unless spoken to, never exist beyond her function as a servant to men who treated human lives like chess pieces. Her uniform was stained at the hem, her hands calloused from work, her dreams buried so deep she'd almost forgotten they'd ever existed. Almost. Until tonight, when those dreams had led her to Ricardo Beneventi's private office, her trembling fingers on his safe, and her entire life balanced on the edge of a blade she'd foolishly thought she could steal. The silver tray weighed exactly 4 pounds when empty. Cindy Pearson had memorized that weight the same way she'd memorized every escape route, every camera blind spot, every rhythm of the security guard's rounds. She knew that Table 7 always ordered martinis with 3 olives, that the men in Booth 12 were skimming from their boss's drug shipments, and that Ricardo Beneventi took his whiskey neat with 2 ice cubes that he never actually drank. She knew these things because invisible people see everything, and Cindy had spent 3 months perfecting the art of being a ghost. Tonight, the tray held 6 glasses of champagne that cost more than her mother's medical bills. Cindy's hands were steady as she wove through the crowd, her face a mask of practiced servility, even as her mind counted down the seconds until Ricardo's attention would be pulled toward the main floor. The entertainment was about to start. Some imported dancer from Moscow who'd charged $10,000 to grind against Obsidian Club's elite for 3 minutes. Everyone would watch. Everyone always watched. That was when she'd slip away. The office door yielded to the stolen key card with a soft click that sounded like thunder in her ears. Inside, the space smelled of expensive leather and older money, all dark wood and darker secrets. The safe sat behind a painting of a woman being strangled by flowers, because men like Ricardo Beneventi thought that was art. Cindy's fingers trembled as she worked the combination she'd stolen from the security feed 2 weeks ago, her breath coming in shallow gasps that fogged the metal surface. The drive was right there, nestled in velvet like a sleeping snake, diamond-encrusted and worth enough to buy her freedom, her mother's life, a ticket to anywhere that wasn't this godforsaken city. She reached for it with hands that had served 1,000 drinks and swallowed 1,000 indignities, hands that were so close to salvation she could taste copper on her tongue. "You know," a voice said from behind her, smooth as smoke and twice as deadly, "most people who break into my office at least have the decency to disable the secondary alarm." Cindy's blood turned to ice. She turned slowly because sudden movements got you killed in this world, and found Ricardo Beneventi leaning against the doorframe like a panther watching a mouse realize the trap has already sprung. He held a glass of whiskey in one hand, 2 perfect ice cubes floating in amber liquid, and his smile was the kind that didn't reach his eyes because nothing ever did. "Hello, little ghost," he said, taking a sip. "I've been waiting for you to show your face." Ricardo moved into the room with the lazy confidence of a man who'd never had to rush toward violence because violence always waited for him. He closed the door behind him with his heel, the soft click of the lock somehow louder than Cindy's thundering heartbeat. She watched him circle the desk like a professor approaching a failed student's exam, all performative disappointment and barely contained amusement. 3 months, he said, swirling his whiskey. 3 months of watching you count my steps, memorize my schedule, study my security like some kind of community college heist film. And this is what you do with all that adorable preparation? You crack a safe I could open in my sleep and reach for the most obvious bait I've ever laid. He laughed, sharp and cutting. "Tell me, Cindy Pearson. Yes, I know your name. Did you really think I kept anything valuable in a safe with a combination I haven't changed since 2019? Cindy's throat closed around words that wouldn't come. The drive felt hot in her palm, burning like a lie she'd been desperate enough to believe. Nothing to say? Ricardo leaned against the desk so close she could smell his cologne, something expensive that probably cost more than her life. That's disappointing. I was hoping for a villain monologue. Maybe some tears. Amateur thieves usually give me tears. He tilted his head, studying her the way a child studies an insect before pulling off its wings. Do you know how boring my life has become, Cindy? I've killed 17 people this year. 17. And not one of them made me feel a goddamn thing. He set down his whiskey and picked up a remote from the desk, pressing a button that made the painting of the strangled woman slide aside to reveal a screen. Security footage flickered to life. Cindy serving drinks, Cindy watching the security guard, Cindy palming the key card from Ricardo's jacket pocket 3 weeks ago while he flirted with a senator's wife. "You've been my favorite show for months," Ricardo said softly, and there was something terrible in that softness. The only thing in this entire club that wasn't predictable. The invisible girl with fire in her eyes, plotting her little rebellion one stolen glance at a time. So when I realized you were finally going to make your move tonight, I thought to myself, Ricardo, don't just shoot her. That would be such a waste of entertainment. He turned those black eyes on her and Cindy saw the abyss looking back. I want to show little ghost. Something to make me feel alive again. His smile was a beautiful, terrible thing. So here's what we're going to do. The smell of his cologne brought it all back. Expensive things, powerful men, the world before it all burned down. Cindy's mind fled backward to a time when her hands had held something more precious than stolen key cards and desperate dreams. They'd held her father's hands as he spun her across a polished floor, her feet barely touching the ground, her laughter echoing off mirrored walls. Pearson Dance Academy had been a cathedral of movement in Brooklyn, all hardwood floors and floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the afternoon light like liquid gold. Her father had built it from nothing, one student at a time, until the waiting list stretched 6 months long and competition scouts came to watch his prodigy daughter dance. Cindy Pearson, they'd called her. The girl who moved like music made flesh, who could tell a story with a single pivot, who'd won nationals at 16 and had Juilliard sending letters before she'd even applied. That was before the Beneventis needed the building for their money laundering operation. Before the fire inspectors found violations that didn't exist and the health department discovered problems in a studio that had no kitchen. Before the loans came due early and the banks that had been friendly for 15 years suddenly demanded payment in 30 days. Before her father stood in the ashes of his dream, his hands shaking as he held foreclosure papers, and whispered that he was sorry, so sorry that Cindy would have to find work, real work, the kind that paid bills instead of feeding souls. She'd watched him die slowly after that, not from the heart attack that finally took him, but from the erasure of purpose. He'd become a ghost long before he stopped breathing, haunting their apartment like a man who'd forgotten he was supposed to be alive. And Cindy had learned that the world had no use for dancers when the music stopped, that beauty couldn't pay medical bills, that dreams were luxuries for people who'd never had to choose between electricity and eating. So she traded her point shoes for practical flats, her stage makeup for invisible servitude, her name for a uniform that smelled like cigarette smoke and other people's excess. She'd become what she needed to become to survive, burying the girl who'd once commanded stages under layers of silence and submission. Until tonight when she'd decided to steal back just a fraction of what they'd taken. But standing in Ricardo Beneventi's office, the phantom scent of rosin and sweat mixing with his cologne, Cindy realized the cruelest joke of all. The man who'd destroyed her father was probably just a signature on some document, a middle manager in the Beneventi empire who'd never even known the Pearsons existed. Ricardo himself had never even heard their name until he'd looked up her file tonight. Ricardo's hand closed around her wrist, not bruising but inescapable, and he pulled her from the office into the pulsing heart of the Obsidian Club like a hunter dragging his prize into the arena. The music died at a gesture from his free hand, conversations withering into silence as 200 predators turned to watch their apex make his announcement. Cindy's legs moved on autopilot, her mind screaming at her body to run, to fight, to do anything except follow this monster onto the main floor where the lighting turned everything into theater. Ladies and gentlemen, Ricardo's voice carried across the room without effort, smooth and commanding and dripping with the kind of amusement that preceded bloodshed. It seems we have a little thief among us tonight. He yanked Cindy forward, displaying her like merchandise, and her cheeks burned as laughter rippled through the crowd. This lovely young woman who's been serving you drinks for months with such dedicated invisibility, decided to help herself to my private collection. The laughter grew louder. Someone whistled. A woman in a red dress that cost more than Cindy's annual salary called out, "What's the going rate for stupidity these days, Ricardo?" "Normally." Ricardo released Cindy's wrist and circled her slowly, a shark scenting blood in the water. "I'd let Marcus handle it. Quick, efficient, nobody would ever find the body." He paused, letting the weight of that truth settle over the room. "But you see, I'm so terribly bored of quick and efficient. I want something different tonight. Something with style." He stopped in front of Cindy, tilting her chin up with one finger, forcing her to meet those bottomless black eyes. "So here's my offer, little ghost. One dance. Just you and me right here, right now. If you can make me feel something, anything real, through your movements, I'll give you the drive and your freedom." His smile was a razor wrapped in silk. "But if I feel nothing but the floor beneath my feet, well, you'll spend the rest of your considerably shortened life as my pet. A pretty little trophy to remind me that hope is the cruelest thing we can give people." The room erupted. Men pounded tables, women shrieked with delight. Someone started taking bets on how quickly she'd break down crying. They expected a comedy, a terrified waitress stumbling through some pathetic attempt at seduction while Ricardo mocked her efforts. Entertainment for people who'd forgotten what it meant to be human. But Cindy Pearson had spent 3 months being invisible, 3 years being broken, and 16 years before that learning to speak without words. She looked at Ricardo Beneventi, at the boredom behind his cruelty, at the emptiness he was trying to fill with her suffering, and she made a choice. She prepared for tragedy. But she'd make damn sure it was his, not hers. "Play the music," she said, her voice steady as stone. The first notes crawled from the speakers like something dying, a tango arrangement so dark and aggressive it felt less like music and more like a declaration of war. The bass thrummed through the floor, each beat a heartbeat torn from a chest, each violin note a scream dressed up in elegance. Ricardo extended his hand, all mock chivalry and predatory grace, and when Cindy took it she felt the heat of his palm against hers, a reminder that monsters were made of flesh and blood, not shadows. He pulled her close, too close, his other hand settling on her waist with the casual ownership of a man who'd bought and broken countless things. The crowd pressed in, a circle of wolves waiting for the kill, their faces blurred by smoke and cruelty. Ricardo's breath ghosted across her temple as he whispered, "Let's see what the little ghost is made of." The music swelled and Cindy moved. She stopped being a maid the moment her body remembered what it was built for. Every muscle that had spent 3 years carrying trays and swallowing rage suddenly ignited, transforming her into something sharp and dangerous. Her first step wasn't a dance move. It was a challenge, her heels slamming down with enough force to make Ricardo's eyebrow quirk with surprise. She didn't follow his lead, she matched it, countered it, threw it back at him with interest. Every touch between them was a bruise waiting to happen. His hand tightened on her waist, trying to control her trajectory, and she twisted away with a violence that made her spine arch like a bow. When he yanked her back, she came at him like a blade, her arm extending past his shoulder in a line so sharp it could cut glass. They spun, and her leg hooked behind his knee, not quite a trip but close enough to make him stumble, close enough to remind him that prey with teeth stops being prey. The music screamed and so did they, but silently, their battle written in the geometry of their bodies. Ricardo tried to dip her, to force her into submission, and Cindy let herself fall only to surge back up with such ferocity that he actually had to brace himself. She was every woman who'd ever served him drinks, every person his empire had crushed, every dream his family had burned. She was a warrior wearing a waitress uniform, and every movement was a sentence in a language he'd forgotten how to read. For the first time in their dance, Ricardo's mask cracked. His pupils dilated. His breath hitched. His grip on her shifted from ownership to something that looked almost like need. And Cindy smiled, sharp as broken glass, because she'd found his weakness. He could be moved. He just needed someone strong enough to do it. They spun closer and Cindy used the momentum to bring her lips to Ricardo's ear, her voice a whisper that cut through the music like a knife through silk. Senator Morrison in booth 3 is wearing a wire for the FBI. He's been feeding them information for 6 months in exchange for immunity on the trafficking charges. Ricardo's entire body went rigid, but the dance didn't stop. His hand spasmed against her waist, and she felt the moment his brain recalculated everything he thought he knew about the invisible girl in his arms. The woman in the red dress? Cindy continued, spinning out and then snapping back against his chest with enough force to knock the air from his lungs. She's not here for business. She's here because her husband, your accountant, is sleeping with your cousin Maria, and she wants you to kill them both so she can collect the insurance money. Another turn, her leg wrapping around his in a move that was both seductive and threatening. She's been poisoning your drinks for 3 weeks, testing dosages. Small enough that you'd blame the hangovers on age. The room spun around them, a kaleidoscope of shocked faces beginning to notice that something had shifted, that this wasn't the comedy they'd paid to see. Ricardo's eyes were black fire now, locked on Cindy's face with an intensity that would have incinerated a weaker person. But she'd been invisible for so long that she'd forgotten how to be afraid of being seen. Marcus, your head of security? She dipped backward, trusting Ricardo to catch her because she knew he would. He needed to hear the rest. He's skimming 30% off every shipment and blaming the shortage on your suppliers. That's why you've been losing territory to the Kozlov family. She rose like a phoenix from his arms, her voice dropping to something intimate and deadly. I have dates, amounts, and the name of the offshore account where he's been storing it all. 3 years worth of theft and you never noticed because you were too busy being bored. Ricardo's laugh was breathless, almost genuine. Jesus Christ. Who the hell are you? Nobody, Cindy said, and the word tasted like power instead of shame for the first time in 3 years. Just a girl who learned that invisible people hear everything, see everything, and remember everything. While you were playing God, I was cataloging every sin in this room, every whispered confession, every drunken admission. I know where the bodies are buried, Ricardo. Literally and metaphorically. She pulled him closer, their foreheads nearly touching, the music building to a crescendo that matched the thunder in her chest. So ask yourself, are you still bored? The music hit its final crescendo, violins screaming like souls being torn apart, and Ricardo Beneventi did something he hadn't done in 15 years of ruling an empire built on blood and broken promises. He felt something real crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen so long he'd forgotten it could thaw. It started as a skip in his heartbeat, a microsecond where his body betrayed the iron control he'd spent decades perfecting. Cindy felt it, the stumble in his step, the hitch in his breath, the way his fingers pressed into her waist not with ownership but with something that looked dangerously close to reverence. His eyes, those bottomless black voids that had watched men beg for mercy without flinching, suddenly looked like they belonged to someone human. Someone who could bleed. You? He started, but the word died in his throat because she'd stolen his language, replaced it with her own. She'd made him feel small in the best and worst way possible. Reminded him that power was meaningless if you couldn't even protect yourself from a girl with a silver tray and enough rage to burn the world down. The final note rang out, sustaining like a held breath, and they stood frozen in the ending pose. Her body arched against his arm wrapped around her waist, their faces inches apart in a tableau that looked like passion but felt like war. The crowd had gone silent, the laughter dead in throats that suddenly realized they'd witnessed something that wasn't entertainment. This was ritual. This was transformation. This was a king recognizing his equal while 200 witnesses held their breath. Ricardo's hand rose to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with a gentleness that seemed impossible from fingers that had pulled triggers and signed death warrants. "You win," he said, and the words came out rough, unpracticed, like a confession he'd never meant to make. "God help me, you beautiful, terrifying creature. You win." The room erupted into chaos. Shouts, accusations, people scrambling as the revelations Cindy had whispered began to detonate like delayed bombs. Senator Morrison was already bolting for the exit. The woman in red had gone white as death. Marcus was reaching for his gun before Ricardo's other lieutenants grabbed him. But Ricardo only had eyes for Cindy, his gaze locked on hers with an intensity that felt like drowning and flying at the same time. "I felt it," he said quietly, just for her. "Every word. Every truth. Every year you spent invisible, watching, waiting. I felt all of it." He released her slowly, stepping back to retrieve the diamond-encrusted drive from his pocket. "Your freedom as promised." He placed it in her palm, his fingers lingering against hers for one heartbeat too long. "Go," he said, "before I change my mind." Cindy made it 3 blocks before her hands stopped shaking enough to pull out the burner phone. The Manhattan night was cold enough to burn her lungs, streetlights casting orange halos through the mist rising from the subway vents. She pressed herself into the shadows of an alley, the diamond-encrusted drive heavy in her pocket like a promise that might actually be kept, and dialed the number she'd memorized 6 months ago when a different Beneventi had offered her salvation. It rang twice before Alessandro Beneventi answered, his voice smooth and warm like honey laced with arsenic. Well, the little dancer actually pulled it off. "I'm impressed, Cindy. Truly." "It's done," she breathed, relief flooding through her veins like morphine. "I have the drive." Ricardo kept his word. "Where's the extraction point?" "You said there'd be a car." Alessandro laughed, and the sound made ice crystallize in Cindy's spine. It wasn't the laugh of an ally. It was the laugh of someone watching a joke reach its punchline, and she was it. "Oh, sweetheart," he said, and she could hear him pouring a drink, ice clinking against crystal. "There is no extraction. There never was. Did you really think I gave a damn about helping some waitress escape? You were a distraction, darling. A beautiful, desperate distraction that kept my dear brother occupied for exactly 90 minutes while I paid a visit to our father." The world tilted sideways. Cindy's back hit the brick wall, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight. "What did you do?" "What I've been planning for 3 years." Alessandro's voice was positively gleeful now, drunk on victory and whatever expensive liquor he was drowning it in. "Papa is dead. 3 bullets to the chest, very quick, very efficient. And the security footage I doctored shows you breaking into his estate, stealing from his personal safe and fleeing the scene. The police already have your name, your face, your entire pathetic history. By morning, every cop and criminal in this city will be hunting for the girl who murdered Vincent Beneventi." Cindy couldn't breathe. The air had turned to concrete in her lungs. "But here's my favorite part," Alessandro continued, savoring every word like wine. "Ricardo gets to watch you hang for it. His new obsession, his equal, the girl who made him feel something for the first time in years, revealed as the killer of his father. It'll destroy him. And while he's busy burning the city down looking for justice, I'll be consolidating power with the family's blessing. Everyone wins. Well, except you." He paused and she heard him take a long sip. "Thanks for the dance, Cindy. It was exactly what I needed." The line went dead, leaving her alone in the dark with a prize that had turned to poison in her hands. Cindy was still standing in the alley, her world crumbling into ash, when the black town car pulled up with the kind of silence that money and murder could buy. The rear door opened and Ricardo Beneventi stepped out looking like he'd never left his throne at all. His suit was still immaculate, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that made her realize she'd been dancing in a game with rules she'd never understood. "Alessandro called you, I assume?" Ricardo said, lighting a cigarette with the casual grace of a man who'd orchestrated every move on a chessboard no one else could see. "Let me guess. Dead father, fake evidence, your face on every wanted poster by sunrise?" Cindy's silence was answer enough. Ricardo took a long drag, smoke curling from his lips like a dragon's breath. "My brother was always too clever for his own good. Smart enough to plan a coup, stupid enough to think I wouldn't notice him courting my staff for 6 months." He flicked ash onto the pavement. "I knew about you from the beginning, Cindy. Every conversation, every promise he made, Every lie you believed. Why do you think I let you get so close? Why do you think I made that ridiculous wager instead of just killing you in my office? The truth hit her like a fist to the stomach. You wanted to see what I'd do. I wanted to see if you were worth keeping, Ricardo corrected, stepping closer. And you were magnificent. That dance. He smiled, and it was almost genuine. That was real. Everything else. Theater. Including my dear brother's little patricide fantasy. He pulled out his phone, showed her a photo of Alessandro slumped in a chair, very dead, very recently. I dealt with him 20 minutes ago. Tragic accident. He'll be mourned appropriately. He reached into his coat and pulled out the diamond-encrusted drive, opened it with a flick of his thumb to reveal the empty chamber inside. There was never any data, Cindy. Just bait for rats and desperate girls. He held it out to her. But you won the dance. I'm a man of my word. You're free to go. Ricardo walked to the alley's exit, opened the door to the street and gestured with mock courtesy. Outside, a dozen armed men stood in formation, their faces cold and professional. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Alessandro's final gift, the hunters coming for their prey. Ricardo turned back to her, and his smile was the most dangerous thing she'd ever seen. Beautiful and terrible, and offering a choice that wasn't a choice at all. Or, he said softly, you can stay here. With me. As mine. No police, no hitmen, no running. Just you and me and whatever this thing is we started on that dance floor. He extended his hand, palm up, waiting. Choose wisely, little ghost. You only get one. The sirens screamed closer. The hitmen shifted, hands moving toward weapons. And Cindy Pearson stood at the crossroads between death and ownership, knowing that either way she'd already lost her freedom the moment she'd made Ricardo Beneventi feel something real. The screen faded to black on her reaching hand, trembling in the space between two hells, while somewhere in the distance, music began to play. And now, as the music fades and the screen goes dark, the question lingers in the silence. What would you have done? If you were standing in her place, would you have taken freedom and run, knowing death might be waiting, or chosen the safety of a golden cage? Was the dance an act of bravery, manipulation, or revenge? Was the monster revealed, or merely replaced? And in the end, who do you think really won? The woman who survived or the man who finally felt something? Let us know in the comments. Your answer might not be as simple as you think.